Yeah, it's interesting that when you're in a beautiful place and you think about, oh my God, thank God it's here, but then there's the beautiful part of the story and the ugly part of the story.
Right. Our fingerprints as Americans are all over our mistreatment of the first people that inhabited America. And I'm not afraid to be a part of that story. I'm not afraid to tell it. I don't think I'm somebody who's reinventing history. I don't think I'm somebody that's been put here to teach it. I just wanted to be a part of the story because I wanted it to stay alive. Two men embark on a camping trip. These two men have never met before. They push through heavy snow, get soaked with rain, and wash down steaks with hot coffee. They didn't set out to change America, but what they dreamed up around the campfire some might call it ingenious. Others might say cunning. But boy, did it work. In 1903, President Teddy Roosevelt and conservationist John Muir spent 3 days together here in Yosemite National Park. Two nights underneath the stars. They pushed through heavy snow, get soaked with rain, and wash steaks down with hot coffee at dinner time. They also have spirited conversations about the broken national park system and the destruction of America's natural resources. America's wild places are under an all-out assault. And the 6 national parks that already exist are being decimated by profiteers attempting to get rich off the land. John Muir, at age 65, spends 3 days showing Roosevelt around Yosemite. He shows the president the falls. He shows him the towering granite structures that pushed through the earth 100 million years ago. And they sleep under the canopy in Mariposa Grove. An experience about which Roosevelt later writes, "We lay in the open, the enormous cinnamon-colored trunks rising about us like columns of a vaster and more beautiful cathedral than was ever conceived by any human architect." Muir is influencing the president in his own way by getting him to fall in love with a place that Muir has already loved for 3 decades. Whether Roosevelt knows that Muir has a plan or not, he later writes that John Muir's greatest influence was always upon those who were brought into personal contact with him. And on that final night of their trip, Muir exacts the influence over the most powerful man in America. And together they come up with a plan to fix the national park system and protect America's most beautiful lands from those who would seek to destroy them. A year before Roosevelt's trip to Yosemite, a bill had been proposed in the House of Representatives by Iowa Congressman and Civil War hero John Lacey. He had recently taken a trip to New Mexico and made a stop at a historical site called Chaco Canyon. First built almost 1,200 years ago by indigenous Americans, this impressive collection of 15 major complexes remained the largest buildings ever constructed in America until the 19th century. But Congressman Lacey found throngs of pot hunters, thugs and henchmen sent by wealthy private collectors who were here to tear the artifacts out of the ground. Lacey's bill never got any traction, but something about that concept stuck in Teddy Roosevelt's mind.
What was Lacey's bill about?
Why can't you ask me something about baseball?
Who's the all-time triples leader?
Ty Cobb.
Nope, his teammate Sam Crawford, 309.
All right, what's the question?
Yeah, I was asking about Lacey's bill.
Lacey's bill, well, I think the spirit of Lacey's original bill was to protect places like Chaco Canyon, right? I mean, the idea was that it was a law designed to protect places with cultural or historic value to the American people.
Why do you think it took 4 years for it to...
Well, I think it took a while and a powerful president's backing Roosevelt, because it gave the president himself enormous power to deem an area of land protected by federal law without it needing to pass through Congress or the Senate. But what Roosevelt and Muir were dreaming up around their campfire in Yosemite was more of a question than it was an answer. And the question was, what if we could use the spirit of Lacey's original bill to not only protect those cultural artifacts, but also the larger pieces of land that surrounded them? For instance, if I found, let's say, an artifact right here, what's to say that there's not some over there, or even up here? That was their idea. Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir were both students of history. They both knew the entirety of Yosemite Valley, the rivers that run through it, and the cliffs that rise above are all loaded with cultural artifacts. Because this area has a long and rich human history, one that's seen periods of serenity, as well as bloody war. For nearly 7,000 years, the granite walls that surrounded the valley provided a fortress of solitude for those who inhabited Yosemite. There's an endless supply of food and fresh water. It was inevitable that humans would find this place. And once they did, they'd hunker down and call it whatever their word for home was. I want to go back in time, way back, to a part of Yosemite's ancient history that really helps me appreciate the Yosemite we have today. And this part of the story starts 30,000 years ago and more than 5,000 miles away. While nobody exactly knows why the last ice age started, the leading theory is that the Earth's orbit around the sun changed for a period of time, and the average temperatures around the globe dropped by 10 degrees. Because of the falling temperature, more and more glaciers form in the northern hemisphere, pulling ocean water into the expanding blocks of ice and causing sea levels to drop. Around the Bering Strait, water levels drop by 300 feet, exposing land that humans haven't seen before. Woolly mammoths, bison, and horses begin migrating over this new land. And so do their predators, like the extinct Beringian lion and the short-faced bear. And so too follow the greatest predator of all time, humans. It turns out they were all crossing a bridge that connects the Asian continent with North America. And thousands of years after the journey starts, humans eventually arrive in Alaska. All Native Americans are descendants of the people who crossed the bridge, and they spread across the continent. Some stay in the north, becoming the Inuit and the Aleut people. Other groups spread east and south. Some landed in Central America, becoming the Mayans and the Aztec people. And somewhere in the neighborhood of 23,000 years after they left Siberia, one group lands here. The first humans to arrive in the region we now call Yosemite must have been in awe at the breathtaking expanse of the valley. The proof is in the name they give to it, Awani, which means large, gaping mouth. The people know their home and name themselves the Awanichi, or dwellers of the Awani. I've always thought it would be fun to be the first person to discover a new place, especially one as spectacular as Yosemite, mainly because you get to name everything. Tessaak is named after a woman from the Mono tribe. They think the Mile-High Court structure resembles her head and shoulders, with a traditional Mono bob haircut and bangs. It would later be renamed Half Dome. The dark strips of lichen that run down the rock are said to be her tears. And the tears collect at the bottom in this still as glass lake that they named Awea, or quiet water. They named this 3,000-foot tall granite monolith Tuto Kanula, or Chief. although the story of why they chose this name changes depending on who you ask. Some say it was named after a specific leader. Others say that its stature makes it look like it's in charge of the entire valley. Yosemite's black oak trees are the primary food source for the first settlers. The acorns from each tree provide enough calories for 100 awanichi to fuel up for a day. The awanichi women spend much of their day gathering the nuts and heating water in baskets to leach the tannins from them. Then they grind them with heavy stone pestles against the rocks, creating a thin mush that will eventually be turned into a staple of their menu, acorn soup. The hunters wrap themselves in deer hide and place a stuffed head upon their own as they stalk Yosemite's mule deer. Their bows are made from the wood of cedar or spruce trees, the strings from twisted milkweed fibers, and the arrowheads are made of black volcanic glass called obsidian that they acquire and trade with nearby tribes. They also hunt the black bear and the grizzly bear that were once abundant here. For 7,000 years, life in Yosemite Valley was in perfect balance. Don't take too much from the land, and the land will continue to give. The occasional skirmish breaks out between tribes, but according to oral tradition, there's rarely much bloodshed. But the times, they change. Minute by minute, second by second. We can't stop it or slow it down, no matter how much we'd like to. And eventually it changes enough that the beautiful balance that humans had found in the valley is thrown entirely out of whack. You know, by the time Teddy Roosevelt and John Muir had got to Yosemite, all the names of the places had begun to change. Pohono was no longer called Pohono, and Tutukanula was, well, it had a new name as well, an English name. And it's not hard to imagine the reason why, but after 7,000 years of solitude, the wolves had finally reached the gates. And it was all because a man building a lumber mill happened to be in the right place at the exact right time of day and happened to see the sun glint off a few little shimmering rocks in a river. It's the beginning of the gold rush, and America would truly never be the same. In 1848, a lumber mill is being built right here on the American River, about 120 miles north and west of Yosemite and the Awanichi homeland. The foreman of the project, James Marshall, sees something in the water. He suspects it's gold, and after a few tests, his suspicion is proven to be correct. The laborers with him are in a frenzy. but he tells his men to keep working on the mill and they can hunt for gold during their free time. Of course, they do just that. And the river is full of gold. And the word begins to spread. One of Marshall's workers finds $30 worth of gold between shifts. About $1,200 in today's value. And it makes the front page of the newspaper in San Francisco. Within 2 months, nearly every male resident of California's largest city packs up and heads north to the Sierra Nevadas. So many people catch gold fever that a man named Samuel Brannan opens a general store to outfit the miners with picks and shovels. He profits $750,000 in present-day value in that one store in its first 6 weeks of opening. Eight months after the first shining flecks were found in the river, the New York Herald publishes a story about a cache of gold in the Sierras. And 3 months after that, President James K. Polk acknowledges the discovery in an address to Congress. After 7,000 years, the Awanichi's way of life in the bountiful and peaceful valley is about to be upended. The one thing left to protect it was the same thing that had always protected it. The snowy mountain peaks and craggy cliffs that the early fur traders had said were impassable a few years before. But the quest for fur pelts is one thing. Gold fever would make a man do crazy things. After President Polk's address to Congress, California's population skyrockets from 14,000 people up to 200,000 in the blink of an eye. Clipper ships from Shanghai flood into the ports of San Francisco. Another 25,000 men arrive from China. And soon the first gold ship leaves the port of San Francisco with $20 million worth of gold for the U.S. Mint in Philadelphia. As news of the California gold rush spreads around the world, the gold rush itself spreads, moving south and east, following the path of the Sierra Nevadas. By 1849, gold miners are within 20 miles of the entrance to Yosemite Valley. And pioneer Jim Savage sets up a trading post along the banks of the Merced River, the same river that has been the lifeblood of the Awanichi for thousands of years. It seems a conflict would be inevitable. And then the state government pours 1 million gallons of jet fuel straight onto the fire. What I'm thinking is sort of a tough thing to articulate.
About the Government Protection Act?
Yeah, it's a tough part of the story for me to talk about. I mean, here we are in this beautiful place, and we're all lucky to even get to see it. But I guess with any wild place in America, there's the other part of it. The brutal part, the part that makes you question whether any of us should be standing here in this valley and enjoying this view in the first place. You know, I know you want me to riffed on the complicated stuff, but it's tough. I mean, I'm not a scholar. I don't have a PhD on all of this.
Just tell us what you do know.
Yeah, well, I do know it was called the 1850 Act for the Government and Protection of Native Americans, which of course it wasn't. It wasn't about protecting Native Americans at all. It was far from it. It allowed white men to take Native women as their wives, just because they said so. Remember, this is 1850, 11 years before the Civil War, 15 years before slavery was outlawed in the U.S. Basically, it was a piece of paper that said, wipe them out if they get in your way. But the people that had lived here, the Awanichi, they weren't going to go down without a fight. The man who built the trading post here, 20 miles from Yosemite Valley, James Savage, already has somewhere between 5 and 12 indigenous women that he's taken as wives during raids on their villages. And as his trading post blossoms, the gold seekers are pushing closer and closer to the Awanichi's homeland. The miners that Savage's trading post caters to are hunting the deer and the bear. They're chopping down the oaks to build shelter. And they're polluting the waters as they tear away at the river banks. The Awanichi's existence, or at least their way of life, is on the brink of extinction. Their chief, Tenaya, knows that Savage's trading post is the lifeblood of the miners who threaten his homeland. And decides to strike the first blow. After hearing about the encroachment of prospectors from nearby tribes, Tenaya and some of his warriors launch an attack on the trading post at night, starting fires and barraging the building with hundreds of arrows. Savage and a dozen indigenous men from other tribes who he's already taken as slaves manage to ward off the attack and follow them upriver. But when they reach the gorge just before the entrance of the valley, Savage calls off the pursuit. He knows that Tenaya and his men would have the upper hand in a fight in their home territory. But this skirmish will be nowhere near the end. And Savage is even more motivated to continue his push further into hostile territory. The precipice of Sentinel Dome becomes a strategic lookout for Tenaya and his warriors. They know that the prospectors are coming to invade the land they love. And they want to have the upper hand when the valley is finally breached. Tenaya knows it's just a matter of weeks or even days before this peaceful place will see bloodshed. His options are to continue to fight for his home or give up and let James Savage and the men like him take the women and children as slaves. The war is inevitable, and he decides once again to go on the offensive. While Savage is in Sacramento trying to drum up support to launch an offensive of his own, Tenaya and a band of 350 warriors attack two more of Savage's trading posts. This time they pillage the goods and kill nearly everyone at both stores before burning them to the ground. When Savage returns, he finds the charred remains of his stores and the bodies of his workers. Some are shot with as many as 20 arrows. Others appear to have been skinned alive. The battle has now turned into an all-out war. When Chief Tenaya makes it clear that neither he nor his people are planning to give up their homeland to those who seek gold, James Savage and those who support him launch an all-out assault. California's Governor, Peter Hardman Burnett, authorizes Savage to round up 200 militia men, including U.S. Army soldiers, and orders them to head into Yosemite. This time, the imposing cliffs and rushing white water will not deter them from pursuing Tenaya. They are on a mission to secure the land for gold exploration. Savage forms the Mariposa Battalion and splits it into 3 companies. Then they begin their march into the region that no white man has ever penetrated. Company A marches up the Kaweah River toward the valley. They raid and burn villages of the neighboring Chowchilla tribe, who live just outside of Yosemite Valley. They kill the men who fight back and take the women and children as prisoners. The B and C companies go high into the mountains, attempting to find Tenaya and the Awanichi. They push through huge snowdrifts and suffer through several days of driving rain. And then in early May of 1851, they find the valley. The Mariposa's battalion surgeon is a man named Lafayette Bunnell. His 400-page account of being the first outsiders to enter Yosemite accounts for much of what we know about the Mariposa War. And many of the names we use today for the features here are given by Bunnell himself. Bunnell names Vernal Falls as he thought it was a picture of eternal spring. He uses the Spanish word for chief as an homage to Tenaya when he names the 3,000-foot granite monolith El Capitan. And even the name Yosemite comes from Bunnell's misunderstanding of the indigenous word for grizzly bear, Uzamate. He and the others in the battalion believed the Awanichi to be skilled hunters of the grizzly. Bunnell and many of his men are stunned by the spectacle of nature they've discovered. But anytime they express enthusiasm about the incredible sights they're seeing, Major Savage is quick to tamp it down. They are here to complete a singular task: removed Tenaya and the Ahwahneechee from their homeland. The quiet peacefulness of the valley is shattered by multiple bloody skirmishes between Ahwahneechee and the Mariposa Battalion for the better part of a month. Savage and his men raid villages and set fire to food supplies. 37 Ahwahneechee are killed, including Chief Tenaya's youngest son. And finally, on May 22nd, 1851, it's right here at Tenaya Lake that the first people to inhabit Yosemite lose their home. It was 18 years later that naturalist John Muir spends his first summer in Yosemite. Much of that time is spent hiking and camping around Tenaya Lake. You know, John Muir was clearly infatuated with this place. You could tell how it inspired him. It's a bit ironic that the place in Yosemite that still carries Chief Tenaya's name is the place where he came face to face with the man who'd been hunting him. For James Savage, it had become personal. He blamed Tenaya for the attacks on his trading post. And now, backed by a battalion of men, Savage had surrounded Tenaya and his people and would accept nothing less than a complete surrender. With no chance of victory or retreat, Tenaya acquiesced and agreed to give the entire Yosemite Valley and the area surrounding it to the state of California. In return, their reward was a forced march to the Fresno River Farm Reservation. It was a death sentence, really. Simply a place for them to disappear, to wither and die. And that was the end of the Mariposa War. For 7,000 years, Tenaya and his people had lived in harmony. But with the promise of gold in these mountains, there would be harmony no more. Thousands and soon tens of thousands of prospectors flood into Yosemite as gold is found high in the mountains, in the rivers and streams. The exploitation of the land begins in full force. Trees are timbered, rivers and streams are polluted, animal populations are decimated or completely eradicated. And it won't be long before the very creature that Yosemite is named after is wiped out of the ecosystem. By the time Teddy Roosevelt arrives for his camping trip with John Muir, the gold rush has come and gone. While there are still some mining operations in the area, the threats to the land have changed. Sheep herders have taken up residence in Yosemite Valley, erasing wildflowers from the landscape. Roads have been built, bringing thousands of tourists to the park each year, and garbage litters the valley floor and waterways. While some of the surrounding areas are supposedly protected by the federal government as a national park, some of Yosemite's most iconic features, including the valley, are outside of the park's borders. It's a free-for-all, and everything you see is up for grabs. So Roosevelt and Muir, they sit by the fire and they hatch a plan to change it. You know, no one knows for sure, but I think there's a really good chance that Muir told Roosevelt about Chief Tenaya's struggle and his nation's long history of living in the Yosemite Valley. That's what made Muir special. Some might call it ingenious, others might even say it's cunning. But boy, does that plan work. After 65 days, 265 speeches, and 72 hours in the wilderness with John Muir, Roosevelt returns to D.C. and gets right down to work. With memories of Yosemite fresh in his mind, he and Iowa Congressman John Lacey pushed through an intentionally broad piece of legislation that allows Roosevelt to preserve and protect historic landmarks. The Antiquities Act is signed into law in 1906, and Roosevelt uses his newfound presidential power right away. While it was nature that Roosevelt and Muir wanted to protect, it's the human history that gives the president the authority to do so. Roosevelt takes Yosemite Valley away from the state of California and puts it under the protection of the federal government. All thanks to Chief Tenaya and the heroic stance that he and his people took. Roosevelt could see that it was up to us to preserve their cultural history. Next on Roosevelt's list is the 1,400 acres surrounding a pillar of igneous rock that we now call Devil's Tower National Monument. It was considered a sacred place to 20 tribes of the Northern Plains, and Roosevelt cites this as the reason to protect it. He notes the ancestral Puebloan people and the Zuni who had lived here as the reason to protect 1,300 acres of wildland at El Morro. And the long history of Apache tribes are the reason to protect 50,000 acres at Petrified Forest National Monument in Arizona. The Yana and Maidu tribes had used this area as a meeting point for centuries. And that's the reason to preserve 106,000 acres at Lassen Volcanic National Monument. For 10,000 years, indigenous Americans inhabited the Grand Canyon. And their long history allows Roosevelt to protect over 1.2 million acres of wildland here. This picture was taken the morning after Roosevelt and Muir sat by the fire here on Glacier Point and dreamed up the playbook that Roosevelt would use to preserve and protect 230 million acres of public land. And the plants and animals that lived on that land now have the full support of the U.S. federal government. Although some U.S. cavalry troops had previously been sent to Yellowstone to stop bison poaching, all the national parks and monuments now had the full might of the United States military protecting them. By granting the president the authority to act quickly. Roosevelt is able to get the job done. And at the rate Americans' natural resources were being depleted and destroyed at the turn of the century, the playbook he and Muir put together on that snowy night in Yosemite saves countless wild spaces for current generations to see with their own eyes. You know, it's a pretty rare treat, being up here all alone. Sometimes I find myself getting lost in my own imagination, looking down at all this. My mind always goes to the first people who came to this land 7,000 or so years ago. I can pretty much picture them down there on the valley floor, looking up at where we're standing here. What were they thinking? What were they saying? Then my mind ping-pongs again, and I flash forward about 70 centuries. And I imagine John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt sitting right here, shivering in a May snowstorm, smell of steaks on the grill, coffee cup in their hand. You know, Roosevelt said himself about Muir after he died that John Muir talked even better than he wrote. I would have liked to hear that.
Sure.
All right, I think we should probably go.
Excuse me. Do you mind taking a photo of us?
Sure. All right. You guys married?
About to be.
All right. Well, I think you're gonna like this one.